Chris O'Neill from Sew the Distance. Thank you for joining me today as I give you some tips and tricks on how to improve your foundation paper piecing skills. Try saying that, because I've had to record this a few times saying that over and over again. All right, so this video is sponsored by Missouri Star Quilt Company. They sent me all the stuff to make a project. I'm gonna be making a table runner. I can't give you all of the details of the pattern because the pattern's not mine, but good news is I am going to be giving lots of tips on how to be better at paper piecing because this entire pattern is paper pieced. But this kit, look at how pretty. Oh my goodness, let me take the pattern out here. Look at those fabrics. Don't they look like watercolor? And the background is this beautiful baby blue. Oh. And the pattern itself has 4 different sizes included. So it's the mini, the table runner, the baby, and the throne. We're gonna be making the table runner today. I went ahead and copied all of the pages that I needed for this, and I used a newspaper print. You can buy this by the ream like you can regular paper. What I'm gonna do next is cut these out. Now, I like to cut them out. Here, let me cut one out and I'll show you. Okay, so I like to cut it out just beyond that 1/4 inch seam allowance. For me, this makes sense in my brain. So I'm gonna do that. I'm also gonna press all of my fabric and cut it out according to the cutting instructions. And yes, there is a list of cutting instructions in this packet, which makes the pattern even better because sometimes you gotta figure that out on your own. So there are quite a few pieces. I'm gonna go ahead, press this really well and start cutting these out. Cut out my pattern pieces and I'll meet you back here. Everything is cut and organized on these trays. I even color coded the sections, so there's 9 different sections, and I made sure that I used a tray for each one, which is just a wonderful way to do it because I can take this right to the machine and I can assembly line piece that entire section for all of the blocks that I need, and then go to the next tray. If you don't have trays, you can always use paper plates, or you can use these paper platters, or even a piece of cardboard or something, but it's nice to have everything separated, labeled, and ready to go because this will help you in the whole process. Another tip is to make a sample, which is what I did. I made the mini version of this. Isn't it pretty? So this is just 2 blocks. By the way, for this pattern, this is 1 block. It's considered 1 block, and this is 2. I just love the way this turned out. I think it's so cute, and I can't wait to see the way this table runner is gonna turn out too, because I think it's gonna be great. All right, so let's talk about your machine and everything you need to do to set up your machine for successful paper piecing. Again, this is, according to me, I'm not an expert in paper piecing by any means. There are a million ways, like I always say, to make a quilt. Paper piecing is no exception. So let's check out the machine and what I do to prepare. The first thing I do is I make sure that I have a coordinating thread. In this case, I'm using a light blue because the background is light blue and because these fabrics are very muted. And I also wind some bobbins so I have them ready to go. I also change my needle. I like to have a nice new needle on my machine. If I have a nice sharp needle, it pierces that paper so much better and the fabric, and I just have a much more successful experience. I also use my open toe, I guess, is that what it's called, foot, on my machine. So I like this one because it has the red arrow. It shows me exactly where I'm stitching, and I can line up my line for paper piecing right on that line, or arrow, I mean, and I can stitch, and it's great. And finally, I turn my stitch length down to 1.5. I go very, very small. This is gonna make it so much easier when you are taking out those papers, and it secures the stitches really well. Okay, now that we've looked at the machine, here are some tips on your workspace because I like to set that up ahead of time too. Now, not only do I have the trays ready to go, I also make sure that I have a pressing surface ready. I have a cutting mat, and I just use a small one. I have a small rotary cutter with a very sharp blade. I have my add a 1/4 ruler, but if you don't have that, that's okay. You can always use a regular ruler and add a 1/4 inch when you're trimming things down. Small snips. I like to cut my threads immediately right after I sew the pieces on, and that just keeps the whole back very clean and nice, and then you don't have that shadowing through. So I keep a pair of tiny little snips here. And then I also have this thing, which is what I use to fold the fabric back on. Not the fabric, the paper back on to crease when I'm using the add a 1/4 ruler as I'm paper piecing. This thing is from Susan Cleveland. I love it. It's for prairie points, but it works so well for this. If you don't have something like this, you can just use an index card. That will work fine too. And I think the add a 1/4 ruler, if you do have one of these, whoops, just dropped that. The add a 1/4 ruler now, the newer ones have an edge on the one side opposite of the 1/4 inch side that you can use to crease your paper when you're getting ready to cut down and add the next piece. I'm not sure. This one's really old. This one's, I don't know, probably 20 years old. So I think the newer ones do have that. I also have some glue ready if I need to use it, some clips and some pins just to help me out along the way, and it's all right here, so I don't have to go looking for any of it. And then finally, I have a trash can ready to go with all the scraps that I accumulate. And then I'll go through this at the end and pull out any scraps that I know I can use, and any that I can't use maybe in projects in the future, I will use it for stuffing for pet beds or whatever I would need stuffing for, so it doesn't go to waste. And this just stays right there so I can clean up as I go. And speaking of cleaning up, I also will stop and clean up as I go, a few blocks in or a few sections in, just to keep myself on task and to not get overwhelmed, because the mess can become very overwhelming very quickly. All right, so now that I've given you a ton of tips, I'm gonna sew these blocks together. I will meet you back here with the final product of this wonderful kit that I got from Missouri Star Quilt Company. So this project took a few days to make. It's a tedious project. There's a lot of parts, a lot of pieces. So it's not something that you maybe can do in a weekend, but it is a very rewarding project because the finished product is awesome. And I'm gonna show you in a minute, but I also want you to make sure you stay tuned because I do have a few more tips on paper piecing, and I'll also talk about this pattern specifically, or this kit, I guess, specifically, and some tips on that too, in case you want to get it. All right, here it is. You ready? Oh my goodness. It's all done. Look at how pretty. It's super long. I love it. And it's densely quilted, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. And I love the binding. And then on the back, turn this around, I pieced the backing, which I love because I had some extra pieces. In fact, I had a lot of extra fabric from this, which is always wonderful too. So the kit itself had plenty of fabric in it to make this, and then some. But let's talk first about some more tips on paper piecing. And one of them has to do with removing that paper. So that my best tool for removing the paper is this thing, which is called the purple thing. It is great. It has two ends. One is a 1/4 inch little nubby, and one is a pointy part. This works great. I use this, I use tweezers, wooden skewer that you'd use for like shish kebabs. Anything you can think of, even erasers to pull out those pieces works, but I did find that this worked the best, especially for those little pieces. My other tip, and probably the best tip for removing those papers, is to enlist someone else in your life to do it. I asked my husband, he pulled out a ton of papers, which was great because it's a lot. It's a lot when you're pulling out all those little itty bitty pieces. Worth it, but still a lot. The next tip comes from experience. Make sure you read all the instructions completely before you start any project, especially this one. There were things that I missed, and it could have saved me a ton of time had I known that I needed to do things that I didn't do. One of them is laying it out in reverse. I was very confused by that, but you lay them out upside down when you're sewing together, and that's gonna help you in the long run. But all patterns have things in them that you may have missed, so make sure you're very thorough with reading any pattern, especially paper piecing patterns. As for the project itself, it turned out beautiful, and I quilted it in a way where I did a real dense quilting on it. I made straight lines, and then I used my serpentine stitch between those lines, and I just measured from my walking foot, the width of my walking foot. I love the way it looks. I especially love the back. It has a wonderful texture. Look at that. But the whole thing is very pretty. I also had a little bit of a wonky block when I was done. And this probably is from skill, to be honest with you. I don't paper piece a lot, so some of it I had to relearn and play with it. Either way, the blocks were a little wonky, and I ended up having to trim them down about a 1/2 inch less than they were intended to be. So I guess my tip for you is to be a little bit more accurate than I was if you want them that size, or trim them down because it really didn't make any difference in my opinion. I don't think you can really tell with the leaves. Maybe you can, but I don't think so. I think it still went together really well, and nobody's gonna know. Nobody will know if they don't know the pattern, right? Right. So I hope you enjoyed all of these 20+ tips. There's some more on my blog. I'll add them all in there so you can check them out too. And I hope you have a wonderful day. I hope you take some time to sew, and I'll see you real soon. Bye.